Hello there, ladies and gentlemen, this is Orphanlast, aka Skylar Madison, and recently I got somebody requesting to see me draw my mascot. I do have videos like that, but I've been kind of doing it a little bit differently recently. I've been using Affinity Designer. Now, when I go doing image searches, I oftentimes try to find images that might be potentially iconic, and the way that you do that is you stumble upon an image in Google Images that has a celebrity in it. For some reason, Justin Timberlake shows up a lot in my image searches for a guy in a suit.
That's excited.
But sometimes, you know, it's James Bond, and this is
Daniel Craig's James Bond right here.
And so I decided,
oh yeah,
let's do this pose.
This looks really exciting.
And everything that I'm doing here is inside of Affinity Designer. And I thought,
yeah, you know, I kind of want to show people this different technique
that I've kind of gone towards with drawing my mascot, in that having a thumbnail is all fine and good and all, but, you know, if you have it as a vector graphic, you can have this image that may potentially become iconic at some point in time. That's just the size of a thumbnail. And if it's a vector, I can blow that up to being the size of a billboard if I needed to. And that would be kind of cool. So I've started to kind of use Affinity Designer more. This is the first time that I did all of the raster work inside of Affinity Designer. And by and large, I tend to think that that was a mistake. There are raster tools inside of Affinity Designer, but it's a really dumbed down version of tools and such like that. And I have Affinity Photo. I might as well just either draw in that or draw in Krita and then just move over a PNG or, you know, move over the Affinity Photo file over to Affinity Designer and get that image really refined before putting it into Affinity Designer, because when it's all in Designer, it makes me think I can just keep the sketch really sloppy. And that actually posed problems for me with this image and other images in the past, just simply because drawing with the vectors is just really weird. Now, I can't really compare Affinity Designer to something like Adobe Illustrator or anything like that, because I haven't really done a whole lot with Adobe Illustrator. I learned how to do a few things with Adobe Illustrator, but I never got to this level where I felt like,
oh yeah, I'm a freaking good at it.
Whereas with Photoshop, I did. So, as a result, you're going to see me struggle with this mascot's head, even the placement of it. I even deviated away from what the reference said, just because it looked better when I completely did something independent. Like, for the majority of this video,
his head just looks like it's just disconnected and weird.
I mean, the mascot's got a head that's enormous, so some of the posing needs to be different than the reference, and so I kind of ducked it down into the body. You'll see. A lot of what I do with the line work that I really enjoy inside of Affinity Designer is actually being able to bring up this pressure graph, and you'll see me once I finish doing the actual line work with the vectors. You're going to see me spending time babysitting each and every single line and making sure that not only is their placement really good and solid, but also the line thickness, the variance, how it goes thin, thick, or whatever the line needs. I can just play around with that graph and in real time see the thickness of my brush change. Now, I wish that Affinity Designer had something like OpenToonz's pump tool. That would actually make this a heck of a lot easier rather than me having to click on these little nodes on the graph and then move the graph around. I mean, it all still makes sense on the graph, but it'd be faster if I had something like the pump tool, as long as the pump tool didn't wind up creating more control points inside of Affinity Designer. Another thing that I really like about Affinity Designer is the ability to just really quickly duplicate a line or a shape just by Alt-click and dragging on it. It made it so that the waving tie in the air was just so much easier to draw out. Of course, you know, there was a different thought process in rendering it out, but even still, it made it so that I could see the end result earlier. It took about the same amount of time, but I knew it was going to work out because I could actually see the end result before the end result was brought about, if that makes sense. And so, it makes the workflow when you draw or refine an image or ink an image inside of Affinity Designer every bit as good as something that you would expect out of Krita, even Photoshop. And there's something about being able to just zoom in on your artwork and have it lose absolutely none of its resolution. It's just so satisfying. And I know that I've been experiencing that for years now when I've been working with OpenTunes, but knowing that I don't have to deal with the tediousness of needing to animate every single one of these lines, it just makes it so much more satisfying. And the interface is designed for graphic design and etc. But to address kind of a side topic, I've started to create some really compelling thumbnails on my channel, and a lot of it is due to having this guy on my channel, having my mascot appear here on my channel, on the thumbnails and such. As a result, as time develops and I'm able to show that I'm able to consistently create a compelling thumbnail, I think I'm going to eventually create a series titled How to Make a YouTube Thumbnail. And I think that series is going to be really compelling. It won't get in the way of my normal work throughout the week. I have to make a thumbnail for my videos every single week. And a lot of the videos that teach how to make a thumbnail are just garbage. And I had to figure it out all on my own, by and large, simply because I thought that the tutorials were just crap. And making good thumbnails is a big part of being on YouTube and a huge part in promoting your videos. So within the next 6 months, I'll probably start a series on that. I don't plan on having a tutorial series on
how to improve your SEO, how to improve your watch time,
or anything like that, because that's something that I need to work on somehow. But I can teach how to make a good thumbnail. Now, the colors that I'm laying down here, they're really ugly, but some of the reason why I do this is because I just need some sort of color that works for right now. The shirt is this really super light color of blue, and that blue color is so close to white that it gets difficult for me to really see or notice if the colors are going outside the lines. Just working with some base color that just works for right now is something that helps out. You might be thinking, well, didn't you just make a whole bunch of shapes with your line work? Why don't you just create the fill? Well, the reason for that is something that I've already experienced. I tried doing that in the past, but all of my line work is a series of open shapes stacked on top of each other. And there is no way to make that workflow seem to work, at least to my knowledge. If somebody knows of a workflow that works for that, have at it. Tell me all about it. I want to know. But as it currently stands, this seems like it's the best workflow that I could possibly have. Just making the fills be these independent vector objects. Now, you can join lines inside of Affinity Designer, but when you do that, the pressure sensitivity graph winds up being shared in between two of those lines that no longer exist. And so you start doing that with your whole image, and all of a sudden it just looks ugly. And what you'll need to do at that point is police the line thickness throughout the entire image, which is something I'm just not going to do. It's so much easier just to draw out everything with a bunch of open shapes and to make all of your fills these independent objects. Now, at this point, you can see I'm getting fed up with how the face looks, and so I completely scrapped it and just worked with a whole new construction, something that was far more formally constructed, so I could visualize everything in 3 dimensions. It's somewhat similar to how a computer program would think, but ultimately more simplistic because I only have a human brain. And so, this kind of helped me visualize things a little bit better. And it kind of occurred to me at some point in time that the page left eyebrow, it's foreshortened, and I can see the entire page left eye, so I should be able to see the full page left eyebrow. And that took me a little while to kind of figure out, but it still looked a little bit off. And so it just needed to be ducked down into the body. This cartoon character has the same anatomy, but a different set of proportions than Daniel Craig, or for those of you that don't know who Daniel Craig is,
Bond. James Bond.
When you have a character that has this abnormally
orange on a toothpick head,
then at that point you need to kind of adjust the pose to fit the proportions of your character. At least that's the way I see it. If you disagree, then go ahead and disagree. In this case, it definitely worked out for me. And I feel as though he wound up looking enough like the mascot that I've established that people could accept him as, hey, yeah, that's another illustration of the mascot. Making characters that look the same consistently all the time is not something that's just innately simple and easy. Drawing the same person over and over again, especially if he has any layer of detail, is difficult no matter what your skill level is. Now, this is really close to finish, and the reason why I finish it at this stage is because putting the shadows and highlights needs to be done when I plant this guy into a thumbnail. And here, right now, you kind of see me finishing it up and place it into my Mascot repository. Basically, what that means is I have a whole bunch of files with different poses, different activities that my mascot is doing. And if I find myself in a pinch at the end of the week and I can't have enough time to make a mascot specifically for that thumbnail, I can quickly pull from this repository and get him to fit some sort of composition that makes sense with the topic of the video. Now, I used to refine all of the images inside of my Mascot repository up to this level, and this particular version of this image worked out really well for the thumbnail that I put it in. However, that wasn't the case with every single time that I've used the Mascot repository. This is a perfect example. Here, I have shadow all throughout here on him, as if the light source is coming from this direction, which doesn't make sense, because in all actuality, he's got a light source coming from here and a light source coming from here. So if he has any shadows, he should have a shadow that's going along through here so that it makes sense. But I needed to get this image done, and so I output it. No one has made any complaint about this particular image, but it's something that I look at when I finish an image and I think, wow, that doesn't look so hot. Learning to criticize your work in a way that a lot of people won't even think to notice is good, so that you can keep refining the subtle details, even if it's just a tiny thumbnail. And I found that once I started to introduce this guy into my thumbnails, it wound up being this regular work of art that I was working on, so I started to actually care about my thumbnails. Whereas earlier, when I was thinking of them as purely a design element, there was no attachment at all. Here's another example. I really like how this particular thumbnail looks, especially with the 2-point perspective where, you follow these lines off towards a vanishing point and these two lines towards a vanishing point, and, you're able to kind of dissect how this image was made. But again, I have shadow here, and that doesn't make any sense. He's got light that's kind of shining, not directly towards him by any stretch of the imagination, but it's going over here, so you would more so see some sort of rim lighting around here, all around him, and if anything should be shaded, it should be down here through the middle. So ultimately, the shadows and highlights need to be nailed down when I throw the mascot from the Mascot repository into the thumbnail. And here you can see the vector version of that image earlier without any shadows and highlights. And regardless of if he's vector or raster, I think he looks really nice. And I have kind of a more Captain Morgan version of him pointing off towards the distance. So this is the image that I've been working on throughout the course of this video. I think it turned out looking pretty good. And while you guys are just checking it out, I'd like to ask you guys, would you be interested in about 6 months watching a video series on how to make a YouTube thumbnail? Is that something that would interest you? If so, feel free to vote. There's a card up at the upper corner of the screen so that you can vote inside of a poll. If you want to see that series and you don't participate in the poll, then you probably won't see the video series. So make sure you participate in the poll if you're interested, especially, I don't know. And when I zoom out on this guy, man, he does look like he's in action. I'm really happy with how this one turned out. Anyways, guys, that pretty much concludes it for this video. If you guys enjoyed it, please like, share, and subscribe. And if you guys would like to get more notifications from me, feel free to click on the bell or go ahead and follow me on Twitter. If you guys would like to see more content from me, feel free to click on anything that's appearing on the screen right now. Thank you very much for your time.